everybody? Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. And man, I tell you, it feels like it's been ages since we've done one of these traditional videos. We've done so much live streaming lately. It's almost maddening to a point. Just severe weather has been ongoing, and really even now is still ongoing. The threat's a little bit lower today, hence why I'm not live. Yesterday, I just wasn't feeling up to anything at all. I was feeling actually pretty bad. But we're here now, and of course, before we get into these outlooks, I want to clarify that when we look at these outlooks, these are basically going over an average over the course of 30 days to 90 days. These are not a direct reflection of what every day is going to be like. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it here. So, one thing that I've made note of here is pretty much the anywhere east of the Mississippi has a 40 to 50% chance of being above average throughout the month of May here. Now again, this is not going to be what every day is going to be like, but we're going to have more above average temperature days over here than below average across the board here. So anyone from the northeast all the way towards the Florida panhandle and even parts of the northern peninsula, you can expect above average temperatures across the board. Even these areas in the lighter shade of, I would say, this yellowish orange color here, can expect above average temperatures for the most part here. Things kind of get interesting though the further out to the west that you get. The storm pattern is going to be pretty active over these regions, and I'll get into more details in my interest towards the western high plains going forward as we get into the month of May, and then also over here towards maybe West Texas and western Oklahoma as well. Now, this area up here towards the far northern states, this is where we can expect our greatest probability of above average temperatures. Right now, we're sitting at the 50 to 60 percentile range for the month. So anywhere from eastern parts of Montana all the way through North Dakota, most of South Dakota, and pretty much through the heart of Minnesota and even extreme western parts of Wisconsin, we could have above average. We are likely to have above average temperatures here. Some at times could be significantly above average, and maybe even a record or two could be in jeopardy in regards to our record highs. But as a whole here, there's not a whole lot to be concerned about. I think this will be a pretty good reflection of what the precipitation will be like too, for the most part, that being dry. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at that precip map. So one thing that I've made note of on this map in particular, and I wish I had saved the other map, and I'm very upset with myself for it, it's the fact that before we did not have an above average precip signal over here towards the northwest. That has now since changed. I also noticed that for the most part our signal has remained over here towards the western Rockies of above average precipitation here. And a really strong signal in particular has now begun to show up over towards the southwestern plains. So interesting stuff going on here. I do think that this is also going to be a point of interest in regards to severe weather. The way that the trough seems like it's going to be setting up over this region, I think that we're going to see a lot of activity over here. Also a lot of mesoscale action over here for some of the more adept people when it comes to the weather here. So I would particularly be watching over towards southwestern Texas, maybe western Oklahoma as well, sneaking into maybe southern Colorado, maybe south of Denver as a point of interest, maybe for severe weather and maybe even some storm chasing for those of you that do watch. The area is a little further off towards the east. It's a little bit variable right now, so I'm kind of in a little bit more of a questionable space in regards to what happens over here towards Louisiana, Arkansas. Your severe weather season is not over yet. We're kind of past peak point here, but I wouldn't rule out a system or two over towards these regions. Areas a little further off towards the east, the threat's a little bit lower. So not too much concern to be had there. Now, in regards to what we see over here on the dry side of things, look at where we're seeing that below average precip probability right over towards the Dakotas, where we saw that highest probability of above average temperatures here. A lot of ridging expected to be in place towards this region and over towards the Great Lakes and even parts of the Midwest and Ohio Valley, or at least the northern part of the Ohio Valley. So we're going to probably see this area really become pretty quiet, almost dormant at times, I'd say. I kind of hate seeing this over this area in particular because last year we had a lot of issues with this area. There was pretty significant drought that developed, but it seems like we've put a pretty big dent in it throughout the course of winter and spring here. So things have started to improve here. We're not completely out of it just yet, though. So a big factor in our weather, of course, is the Enso region, and it's no secret. And we've actually gone into the neutral phase as of early last month here, but now we've kind of held steady, and that trend is expected to continue pretty much throughout the rest of the year here. Here is a look at the forecast as we go forward here. Now, if we're in between this negative zero point 0.5 to positive 0.5 degree region, that is what you would call a neutral Enso. A lot of you know about the positive phase known as the El Nino phase. It's when we're above that 0.5 degree threshold here. That is when you get into El Nino territory. And then we have the inverse here where you dip below that negative 0.5 degrees Celsius. That is what you call a La Nina. These solid lines are pretty much the general consensus of all these models put together, or pretty much a combination of all the models put together. This isn't necessarily a final forecast. This is more or less an outlook that can very easily change, but you can see here we're sitting very nicely in between the positive 0.5 and negative 0.5 degrees Celsius range. So we're expecting pretty much a neutral Enso throughout the rest of the year. Now, what this could mean is we would have closer to average temperatures across the board. There are, of course, anomalies, hence why we often will look at the oscillations here. So, as of today, this is looking from May 1st to May 8th here. You can see that, interestingly enough, our first oscillation is over towards the Arctic. This is called the AO, or Arctic oscillation. You can see some cold air coming in here, and then you can even see it heading from Alaska down into the northwest. As a result, this is going to move some of these air masses around, and I do think this first week could be where we see those heightened chances for shower and storm activity. Once we get towards the middle part of the month, things could get interesting here in regards to the temperatures. Deep south could be slightly below average, even though we saw on the temperature outlook, and we'll go back a few frames just to make sure you can see it clearly. Look at that. We're well into the orange shade here, which is the 40 to 50 percentile range. So, but you see this blue blob here. This is a cold air mass, so could increase shower and storm chances. Severe weather, for the most part, I would say would be on the low side, but this will drop the temperatures undoubtedly at this point. Then as we continue to go forward, this is heading into the 22nd. Notice that we're kind of cleared out over here. And also, if you look at these contour lines, this is a pretty good reflection of the jet stream at long range. It's not a guarantee, of course, as I mentioned before. But what I've made note of is the fact that we're looking pretty zonal. Basically, what I mean by zonal is these lines are mostly straight. You aren't seeing much in the way of troughing. You aren't seeing much in the way of ridging. So weather, for the most part, at this point, I would expect to be fair as we get towards the middle to latter half of the month. Business, again, may possibly pick up as we get towards the very end of the month and beginning to head into June from this point. Like I said, there are a lot of questions in between now and then, so don't take that as the final forecast here. It's more or less you have to take this with a grain of salt. This is just more or less a look at maybe the signs of maybe an early signal at best. So now we've gotten into that. Let's see how, based off everything that we just looked at, how does this reflect in our temperature map here? So this is heading into May 8th here. Look at how we have this focused area of below average temperatures over here, right where we mentioned before, where we have that heightened probability of precipitation over towards West Texas and over towards New Mexico as well. We could potentially be seeing areas that are about maybe 10, possibly even 15 degrees below average here. And even for these areas where we're expecting the best chance for above average temperatures over towards the Dakotas, we're sitting at about maybe 15 to 25 degrees above average here. Northeast is looking pretty warm as well as we go forward, but watch what happens the next week and how things begin to change here. You start to see that cold air beginning to shift a little further off to the east. This is what we were looking at before when we were looking at the anomaly map here. This is right around the 15th, so it matches perfectly with what we were just talking about here. So you can see those below average temperatures working their way to the south and east even. So Florida even gets in on the action. We could have a few days where we might be about 5 to 10 degrees below average here. All while in the meanwhile, towards the northern states, we're heating up at this point. And then interestingly enough, this is a classic signal that I've seen here, and it was pretty well reflected in the temperature outlook here. It's where we're warmer out to the east, and cooler out towards the west. This is what you would call a negative PNA here. Negative PNA is a situation in which the west is cooler than the east here. And that situation really becomes apparent by May 15th here based off this model. And we continue to see that trend as we go forward all the way up towards the very end of the month, where we kind of level out across the board here. And even as we get into June, it still seems like we have some remnants of that negative PNA setup as we go forward too. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit messier in regards to what we were looking at here, and this is of course the precip map. One thing that is for certain, and it's also pretty well reflected in the precipitation map, is over towards Texas, where we have that above average chance of precip here. Also, here's that drier air that's going to be taking over in drier conditions that will be heading into the Great Lakes as we go forward. Now, if we go 1 week in advance here, you can see that focused area continuing to meander right across the Midwest here and the northern states as a whole. Texas is going to stay pretty consistent at this point because you won't see those heightened probabilities for nothing. Over towards these regions here, we're expecting average to maybe slightly above average precip here. We could see maybe up to about an inch above average possibly in some of the darker shaded areas of green here. So we continue to go forward here. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where when we see those below average temperatures there and that little bit of troughing, it does lead me to believe that we're going to see an increase in the shower and storm activity as we go forward here. Now, by the time we get towards the 29th, we kind of level off. Some of these areas are actually expected to be slightly below average in regards to their normal precip. Doesn't mean that every day is going to be dry. It's just going to be a little bit drier than what we would usually expect towards this particular week in May. This has gone off the record keeping of the last, if I remember correctly, the last 10 years, maybe more. I have to do a little bit more digging around with the CFS here. And then we'll even take a little sneak peek into June here. June, I think for the most part, we really start to level off a little bit. I do think that this summer as a whole, and I don't know if you guys have seen that summer outlook yet that I posted a while back, but definitely urge you to watch that. It'll kind of give you an idea of what we could possibly expect going forward. But from what I did on that video compared to now, I don't really think too much has currently changed with that. Obviously, we know that meteorological summer starts June 1st. So last but not least, there are two things that I'm going to go over here. So first, I want to go over this map here. This is a better look at what our jet stream could be like. Keep in mind, we are looking 30 days in advance. By no means is this a final forecast. There are going to be a lot of changes. And furthermore, we're going to take a look at an analog, which of course is also not a final forecast. And this is kind of giving my own thoughts as to what we could see compared to a very similar year in previous times. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the jet stream first. So here's some of that troughing that I was talking about. As we go through the first week, this is really where I think that we'll start to see a peak in severe weather activity over towards the southwestern states, especially towards the plains. And then right towards the end of that first week here, this is 1 week from now pretty much, this is where we start to see the deep south get into some action here with some showers and storms. Maybe marginal chances of severe weather right now. kind of hard to say at this point. We'll be able to do more finite forecasts probably tomorrow in regards to at least this first week. Going beyond that point, it gets a little bit more challenging going forward. We'll probably have to make more update videos on that as we go. So here's more of that troughing that I was talking about that we can expect over the deep south. This is where we start to flip-flop the temperatures a little bit here. You see troughing and ridging occurring here. So definitely has the signs of a very unstable pattern. Now at this range, we're even past what we normally would look at with the GFS and the Euro. So we're completely into no man's land at this point. But if this trough remains consistently within the model runs, that could be a problem for those western high plains once again. And we could have multiple days of severe weather once more, just like we did last month. And then we see multiple troughs coming through once again as we get towards the very end of the month, and even as we get into the early part of June here. So even though we might be on an early decline from severe weather, it's not over yet. We still have a lot to pay attention to going forward. Keep in mind, again, there is a lot of hearsay with this model, in particular after we get past the 384-hour marker, 16 days. We've pretty much doubled that at this point now. So last thing to talk about here, and this is one thing that I was mentioning earlier, this is us kind of looking at the analogs here. So in particular, from what I saw on this map earlier, let me go back a bit, but what we were seeing on that graph right around our time frame here, and this is May, June, and July, we're at maybe negative 0.1 to negative 0.3 degrees Celsius on our Enso region, so we're a neutral Enso. No secret there, right? So I did some research on particular time frames in particular years where we had somewhere between -1 to -3 degrees Celsius here. Most compelling year that I found that's been relatively close is the 1995 to 96 time frame. The summer of 95 into 96 was pretty busy when it came to severe weather, in particular towards the western high plains. There were several particular events in May that kind of caught my eye. One of which produced some pretty strong tornadoes, a few F4s even. This was before the days of the enhanced Fujita scale here. So just a little tidbit here for anyone that's more into storm chasing or a little bit more into the advanced side of weather here. Definitely urge you to look up the 1995 and 96 season or Enso region, Enso forecast, and kind of get a look at those temperature maps. But that being said here, not going to take up too much of your time. I wanted to try to keep this one under 20 minutes. Looks like we're going to do so here. But that being said, take care, everybody. Take care of each other. And I will see you guys in the next one. Till next time, take care and have a wonderful rest of your evening.